One of the most beloved pastimes of the Halloween season is Scary Movie Night. And of course, there have been a plethora of monsters and creatures from the dark and everything in between to try and scare us on our Friday nights. But of course, there are a few of these rather demonic creatures that are a bit different from the rest, as they are evil spirits that inhabit the body of a car. That's right, today on this episode, we will be going over 3 of Hollywood's horror cars. If you're like me and you're of the millennial Gen Z bracket and you like true crime, the name Killdozer might ring a bell. Also known as Marvin Heemeyer, he went on a rampage inside of a completely armored up bulldozer throughout a town in Colorado. Now, if you're of an older bracket, say my parents' generation, you might actually remember the film Killdozer, by which Heemeyer got his name. In this film, we see a meteorite coming towards Earth and carrying some kind of strange radiation that once it entered the Earth's atmosphere, it actually affected a mining operation off the coast of Africa, causing a caterpillar D9G to come to life. But instead of being benevolent and curious like a certain robot from Short Circuit, we have a psychotic killer. The Cat D9G is actually a relatively iconic piece of construction equipment, something that's very recognizable and whose design elements are still implemented to this day. So seeing one around is not as uncommon as one might think, especially if you live in an area with older machinery in it. Ultimately, many people think that this was the murderous machine that influenced Mr. Heemeyer to do what he did on that fateful day in 2004, but really we're not gonna know because he's not around to confirm nor deny anything about it. What's most interesting to me about Killdozer is the fact that it's not necessarily a possessed vehicle like many other Hollywood horror cars were, but it's in fact a vehicle that gained sentience. It set the archetype for possessed car moving forward while also not being a possessed car in of itself. And as a little bit of an interesting aside, Marvel Comics actually ran a comic book about it back when the movie first aired, and this didn't get a DVD release until 2021, nearly 50 years after it ever landed on our silver screens. It's kind of wild when you think about it. And while its terrifying on-screen appearance was deemed kind of cultish at one point in time, it has had a very large fan base ever since. From out of the construction zone to the high desert, let's now talk about The Car. The film released in 1977 and was sadly a box office flop, as it did not garner a lot of attention in the media like its predecessor would later on. The Car is a heavily modified Lincoln Continental from the 50s, and they only made 3 of them for the film. This film was very low budget from the start, and did honestly a lot with a little. In short, this isn't actually a car, rather it's a demon in disguise as a car trying to kill as many people before it gets taken off this earth. Right there in the opening sequence, we see it running over cyclists like I know many of us wish we could do. And then it continues on a rampage trying to kill humans in any capacity it can, including flipping itself over to try and decapitate people. Yes, that's how unhinged this movie gets. Ultimately, the sheriff and his posse in this small town in Utah band together to try and stop this scourge upon their little tiny piece of earth. And in the end, when they do blow it up with explosives, it is revealed that it is not a car at all, but instead a demon. It's pretty intense and has its own cult following. And it's kind of wild because this is actually only one of 2 The Car films. Yeah, they actually made a sequel. The divine irony is that the second Car film that came out in 2019 is more like a red-headed stepchild, as it borrows elements of the film, but not actually stay true to the plot or even some of the devices. In fact, they even brought in one of the old actors to be in this film, but in a different character role. Yeah, they really messed this one up. In this iteration of the car, it's actually a Chrysler 300Z, and the modifications done to it don't look half bad. Ultimately, this second iteration of the film didn't do even as good as its predecessor, flopping horribly, and is in a nice long list of terrible B films that came out during the pandemic. Hell hath no fury like that of a 58 Plymouth. To finish off today's list, let's talk about the most iconic of all horror cars of all time, Christine. This car is easily one of the most beloved and iconic of film cars of all time because it has left such an impression and impact on many, many people, creating a cult following of guys trying to rebuild these cars from the wrecked cars of the film to guys trying to recreate this car out of their own furies that they may have already gotten. They only came in a two-door configuration with, well, a beige sandstone white exterior with gold anodized aluminum trim. Yet in the film it's red with silver trim and kind of a little bit more on line with a, say, Chevy Bel Air styling. On the same token though, this car was so special that it had some kind of demonic entity pre-built into the vehicle, affecting the owners of it, as we only ever see two of them in the film. Before it had ever even left the factory, it had already started claiming lives and taken names. This was a car not to be trifled with. As the story goes on, the car becomes so murderous, in fact, that after it gets beaten up by a group of wannabe thugs, it turns around and kills them all. It's pretty intense. I will say, in my research for this film, I did sit down and watch it, and I'm just like, wow. Y'all really destroyed a beautiful 58 Plymouth. Oh no. This movie was also incredible for its absolute research into practical effects, using reversed film to show the car pushing itself back together and repairing itself. This was cutting-edge technology at the time, and even now stands up better than most CGI we ever see. It's incredible how well this film has aged. And better still, it's still one of the most beloved horror films of all time. You know this car in this movie before you would ever know something like The Car and its predecessor, or even maybe Killdozer. The influence that this car and this movie had on the film industry as a whole cannot be understated. It helped set the standard upon which many other film cars would be shown after which, because there were other film cars that were very popular and big, of course. You know, you got the General Lee, Dom's Charger, Brian's Eclipse and Supra. These are cars that we all know, but it took a film with such great attention to detail and love for the car, like Christine, to really help us figure out how to properly film these things. Because prior to this, cars were almost always seen as a background extra, not the center of attention. And yes, we had car movies prior to Christine, given that this came out in the 80s, and say The Car came out in the 70s, Killdozer in 74, or even Road Rage, even before that, where a lot of people think that the tractor trailer is actually demonically controlled tractor trailer and not actually got a driver behind the seat, or if it was some kind of apparition. It's just that it took what was already present and raised the bar to a level that all of us loved and appreciated. And while there are many more cars on my Hollywood car list, I wanted to really specify here in Spooktober these three vehicles for being so unique, so interesting, and more importantly, influential on different aspects of how story writing changed in Hollywood, but also how film production and filmography in general were highly impacted, or in the case of a town in Colorado, literally leveled. But with that said, I hope you guys have enjoyed this Spooktober episode, and with that, I will bid thee adieu. Stay safe out there, be cool, God bless y'all, and we'll see you on the next episode. Peace. Definitely gonna be time to go make sure there's no demons inside of my race cars and scooters, because holy cow, is that not something I want to deal with in the future. Oh, jeez. I could deal with a level town. I don't know about a demon-possessed car or pickup truck, for God's sakes. That would be intense.